Welcome. You're watching Channel 9 in Fairfield. I'm Susan Kessel, Connie Boyer, my co-host for Opening Fairfield Doors. We're going to open a door today to Women's Shelter and the Crisis Center.
And this is located in Ottumwa, correct?
That's correct.
And our guests today are Jeanne Sprouse, the Sexual Assault Outreach Advocate, and Garnetta Augie, the Jefferson County Victims Advocate. And so let's just start with you, Jeanne, first. Will you tell us a little bit about the center in Ottumwa?
Yeah, there is the Crisis Center and Women's Shelter. The Crisis Center is actually an office in Harvester Building where we receive a number of the calls. Advocates are housed there. The Crisis Center is open from like 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening, and so those daytime calls are generally handled in that manner. The shelter itself is a separate entity within our agency, and that is the shelter for those victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and we have a minimal population of the homeless. So our agency was formed in about 1979. And it was when a group of concerned citizens decided that there needed to be some safe haven or safe place for women who have endured domestic violence. From that time, we have become much broader. The center and the shelter serve 6 counties now, including Jefferson, Appanoose, Wapello, Davis, Monroe, and Wayne. So it's kind of a broad area.
Is this a national organization, state, or just area?
It's a local, actually a very local area. We receive grant funding and donations to support the center and the shelter. Some of those grant funds are from government agencies, and but as a rule, we're fairly grassroots and pretty self-supporting in most manners. So.
And Garnetta, you are the Jefferson County Advocate. So
Yes, I
what
am.
exactly do you do within Jefferson County? And if I were to have, let's say if I were to have a situation, what would be the appropriate steps for me to take?
If you were involved like in a domestic, I would go through the court system with you, walk you through the court system so you know what was going to happen. If you needed housing, I could direct you to where you could get housing, or like CETA could help out, like if you needed help with like your bills. If you needed shelter, I would take you to Ottumwa to the shelter so you'd have safe housing for you and your kids.
Okay. And then the center in Ottumwa, how many beds, I guess I should
12.
say? So there's room for 12 women.
12 families.
12 families. And that would, so I guess depending, could be several children involved. You accommodate however many children a person has?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, and I was always curious, is there any situation for men when the tables are turned?
No.
Not locally.
Not locally.
They are generally referred to other shelters that might provide safety for men. Those are typically in the more urban areas such as Des Moines.
I usually refer them to Des Moines. There's like 3 shelters in Des Moines or churches that'll help men.
Okay. Maybe you could share some statistics with us.
If you don't mind, if
Yep. That would be great. Some national statistics, and then let's get it down on the local level so we really understand what's happening in our own community.
Well, yeah, you had asked me to bring some statistics, and I do presentations. That's mostly my job, is to do presentations for schools and community groups and agencies that might have need to know or want to know. And so I did pull out some national as well as Iowa kinds of statistics, which would include Jefferson County specifically. But I think some of the more pertinent information is about domestic violence in particular is that it's an important issue because since 1995, 101 Iowans have been killed in a domestic abuse murder. 65 women were killed by their partners, and 12 men were killed by their partners. 15 children were killed in domestic violence murders, and 27 bystanders have been killed in domestic murders. 38 of the perpetrators committed suicide after the murder. So it becomes a very serious issue when you talk about the extreme of domestic violence. But in Iowa, 3 women seek assistance from domestic violence every hour. It occurs every 15 seconds in the United States. 20% of all murders in this country are committed within the family. I can go on, but I think one of the major statistics that kind of astounded me was that battering is the single major cause of injury to women, more frequent than auto crashes, muggings, and rapes combined. And if we think about the number of auto crashes and the statistics we hear about the deaths, and if you think about then the number of women killed in battering, or injured, I guess, 21% of those women who need hospital emergency care are battered women.
Which, when I think about that, the accidents are all reported in the newspaper and everything, where I'm assuming what you're dealing with is not, so we don't hear about these things the same as we're hearing about the other?
They may be...
not in the same way.
Right. They may be reported, excuse me, they may be reported as a domestic in the police reports.
But not the big headlines and the pictures and the everything that we're seeing as far as the other, which...
And sometimes that's because people are not necessarily aware of definitions. I mean, when we think about domestic violence, we think about a husband and wife getting into a fight and one of them getting hurt. And frankly, you know, it's more it's more definable than that. It's pushing, shoving, kicking, hitting. All of that is considered domestic violence. And so when we see domestic violence, like there was a domestic call on so-and-so street, we really don't have the information.
Right.
So, and we are bound by strict confidentiality for victims. We advocate for them. We certainly don't tell them what to do because most of the time the power's already been taken away from them. So we do advise them in terms of the laws, and we advise them in terms of options, but we do not tell them what to do. So many times the charges are dropped or not pursued in some manner.
What are some of the programs? You said your job is to give programs. So in the community, what do your programs entail?
Actually, this month I've given 10 presentations to classroom, 8th grade through 12th grade. I have 12 more to go yet this month.
And what do you tell them?
Well, we first talk about domestic violence, and by definition, we talk about the power and control wheel. And I have some videos that are excellent. One is called The Crown Prince. And that's an excellent video talking about the overall effect on the family of domestic violence. And then I always ask for more than one class time because rarely can you really talk about everything that's involved in domestic and sexual assault in one class time. So the second class time I usually do dating violence because a lot of our young people don't recognize dating violence. They see it as jealousy and love go together, and it's not necessarily true. So we also talk about then sexual assault, date rape, drugs, and how to protect yourself from that. And we talk about healthy and unhealthy kinds of relationships. So if I can kind of finesse my way, I get several class times to talk about those issues and show videos as well.
This is also preventive, hopefully, educational and preventive, along with maybe bringing out something that needs to be addressed.
Exactly. We first of all, we created an awareness by talking about it. You know, many times victims of domestic violence and sexual assault don't talk about it because it's so shame-based. They're embarrassed, and they don't want others to know that they have allowed, or what appears to be allowed, to have that happen to them. Many times they are treated as though it's their fault, and so they begin assuming that it's their fault. And a good example of that is right here in Jefferson County. I think the statistics that that you asked me to bring were somewhat shocking when it comes to sexual assault in Jefferson County. The total number of calls on the crisis line for the 6-county area is 2,033. The total number of calls from domestic violence victims were 937, which is about 46.
Now this is in 2002?
This is 2002, yes, 2002
Okay.
for the 6 counties. The domestic violence calls on the crisis line were about 46% of that, and the sexual assault was 30%. That's calls on a crisis line where you can remain anonymous. You don't have to tell what you know. You can talk about anything. You don't even have to tell your name.
Is this crisis line in the phone book? How to?
Yes, I'm sure it is, but I'll be glad to give you the number.
Yes.
It's 1-800-464-8340. Is that good?
Sounds good.
Okay, I think that's good.
Now, those statistics, were those from Jefferson County?
That's all 6 counties.
That's all 6 counties.
But for the for Jefferson County, we received a total of 149 calls, which is really pretty fair. 110 of those, that is 73%, referred to domestic violence. We only received 5 calls about sexual assault. And in-person contacts in Jefferson County regarding sexual assault was 0. Okay. The outreach office served 13 victims of sexual assault. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that there's maybe not enough talk about sexual assault, and I think it's time we start making sure the victim doesn't feel blamed and so ashamed and can come forward and talk more about that.
For young people, and maybe even for, maybe I should even say parents, because they might be more likely to watch the show than a teenager, what would be some of the things, first of all, that you would tell a teenager or a teenage girl? You know, signs, things that this relationship isn't healthy, that it could go much worse, or go in a bad direction, and then things that parents should be watching for.
Okay.
I would think if he's isolating her, if he's telling her what to wear, how to dress, trying to choose her friends for her, or showing what she would consider signs that he loves me, that jealousy, just trying to control her. In May, I'm starting a sisterhood group for girls between the ages of 13 and 19 to talk about dating violence and some of these signs that they might think that they're in love, but they could be in danger. Mm-hmm. So I hope to get that group started May the 2nd.
And then as a parent, I guess you would look maybe for some of those same signs.
Just basically a change in their behavior from maybe if they was a outgoing individual, fun-loving, doing things with their friend, and all of a sudden they quit doing those things. Mm-hmm. You know, just kind of hovering to the phone to see if he'd call, or not wanting to do anything with their friends again, and those would be signs to look for.
And I think many times the isolation is also isolation from the family. So when the young person starts estranging themselves from the family and doing less and less with the family and spending more and more time with their boyfriend or girlfriend, sometimes, you know, that would be concerning. Mm-hmm. She may not feel like she has a lot of choice about that, or you know, the common response to that for a batter is, are you, you know, don't you love me? Do you love your family more than you love me? Because it's all about power and control. It's all about the isolation, making sure that they have them to themselves, maybe not even having sports. They may not be involved in sports even. So
how do you talk to that person? I mean, as someone who cares for them and maybe sees this relationship as unhealthy and going in a certain direction, you know, when, you know, they say, well, I'm in love, or, you know, whatever their comment is. I mean, is there any way to really reach them to say this, you know, might not be a good thing?
I don't think that you could really, I mean, you can't really tell a young girl how she's feeling. But I would think if you kind of give her food for thought and would just say, well, hey, you used to do this, and now you don't do this, you know, and it's because you're with him. I think you'd have to kind of point out things that she did in the beginning before she was with him versus when she's with him now. You know, because if you try to tell her that she can't see him, then that's going to create, well, you know, he told me that. He said you wasn't going to like him,
Yeah.
you know, because of this or that.
Yeah. And be defiant.
Right.
I think parents, just need to be watchful as much as anything. I mean, it's real hard to do that as much as anything with teenagers. But I think being watchful of who's making the decisions in the relationship. You know, is she giving things up? Like, for instance, if she has some artistic ability and he's involved in sports, does she give up the artistic kinds of things in order to attend the sports kinds of things? What is she giving up in the relationship? I think that's one of the things that needs to be really monitored. Also, I think that certainly a batter shows marks most of the time. There are generally excuses for it, like, you know, the old thing about running into a door, or falling down, or whatever. But if that happens a lot, you know, everybody can run into a door once, I guess, and everyone can have an incident. But if that's happening, if there are a lot of marks and bruises, or, you know, around the arms or the wrists that appear to be restraining kinds of marks, then I would be concerned about the relationship and whether or not. I also talk with young people about, you know, pay attention to your gut. If you're not uncomfortable, get out of the situation, get to where there's company or where there's other people about. So if a young person is saying, I'm just not very comfortable with this guy, for some reason I just don't really feel okay about that, then the parents need to be able to accept that, even though they might see, because most of the batters are very charming. It's not like they're monsters lurking in the dark. That's not the way it works. Obviously, you know, their young person is attracted to them for some reason, so it's not like they're lurking in the dark.
But then you have the emotional marks that don't show, like the bruises, you know, and that would be a young girl who just doesn't appear to be happy anymore, crying more often than not, or just kind of sad more often than not. And that's not something that's going to show up on her physical body.
Yeah, certainly with physical abuse, there's a lot of emotional abuse that precedes that. It actually starts with that. And then possibly shoving, and then it may become more serious. But Garnetta's right. I mean, the whole change of mood, and many times it's like an emotional roller coaster, because the violence is a cycle of violence. It's not like all of a sudden somebody just batters. It builds up. There's a lot of tension that goes on before the actual battering occurs. And once the battering occurs, then there's this honeymoon kind of stage where the perpetrator's real apologetic and saying, I'm sorry, it won't ever happen again. And that doesn't happen just once. It happens over and over and over. So the victim is going to be on an emotional roller coaster.
And I think then, as an adult, if you're married and in a situation like that, it's even more difficult with that commitment, to break away without feeling you're letting someone down, or you're letting yourself down,
children
letting
many
the
times.
commitment down, the children down, to actually get to the point where you know the best thing to do is leave. That's got to be very hard.
I think that's true. In dating violence, we have a matrix. It's a wheel, a power of control wheel, and it was actually created by batters in Duluth, Minnesota, that talk about the different methods of power and control that are used, such as isolation and minimizing, denying, blaming, those kinds of things that they use to do the power and control kinds of things with their partners. And there's a wheel also for dating violence. I mean, they just kind of expand on that notion. And in dating violence, it's not so different than the married couple, except that isolation, you know, rather than saying they can't, excuse me, they can't be a part of just the family and friends kinds of things. It may be, like I said, sports activities or interests or hobbies or leaving town or whatever. But that the commitment that is there is kind of a commitment to a peer group. They're kind of maybe more accepted into a group of friends, so if they give that that partner or that boyfriend, girlfriend up, then they're maybe giving up friends too. I mean, it may change their whole world. So it may not seem as important to us, I guess, or as dramatic to us.
Right.
But to a teen, young person, it's very dramatic because they're having to change their whole way of life again, or try to find new friends, and we know that's kind of difficult for young people.
And then, so let's say the adult woman who finally realizes, I'm in this bad relationship, I need to get out, they can come and get shelter. First of all, how long can they stay? And then second of all, what kind of programs are available to them to get help? And so they can understand more about themselves, get on a better track of getting out of this relationship and understanding why she got into it in the first place, and those kinds of things.
A battered woman can stay, her stay would be 30 days, and a homeless woman's stay would be 15 days. And for groups, we offer, we have support groups and also one-on-one counseling and group counseling, but I think the best support for the women that come to shelter are the other women in shelter that are in that same predicament.
I guess one of the things I would like to talk about in response to that is why they stay. Because I think of all the questions that I am asked most of the time, and that's in dating violence as well as domestic violence, and that is, why do they stay? And one of the last things I would recommend anyone ask a victim is, why are you staying? Why don't you just leave? Because first of all, it's re-victimizing the victim. It's like blaming her for being in a relationship rather than blaming the perpetrator who should not be hitting her or pushing her or kicking her or whatever. They stay because of what they have to give up to leave, many times. If you think about it, you know, what are the 5 most important things in your life? And this is what I tell young people. Think about it, write it down. What are the 5 most important things in your life? Now, I want you to give up one of those things in order not to get beaten up. What are you going to give up? Your pets? We don't take pets at the shelter. What are you going to give up? Your kids? You know, well, that's a possibility because many times the batter, you know, threatens to take custody of the children, and she believes him. She believes that that's possible because she doesn't really think very much of herself. She's very, very, feeling very worthless many times because that's what he's told her. Nobody else will have you. So she may also have to be alone. She have to give up friends, she have to give up family. Many times families have abandoned the victim, and I guess if I can say anything at this discussion that I would recommend is never give up on them. It's not unusual for me to receive a call from a family member, a sister or a mother that says, I know she's going to go back to this relationship, or I know she's in this relationship and she won't leave, or and I don't know what else to do. And many times they kind of burn people out. They don't want to watch. They don't want to have to be there because it's too hard to watch. And I just keep telling them the best thing you can do right now is to talk about it with somebody and how you feel about it, but please don't give up on her because she's going to need you one of these days. She's going to, you know, women tend to leave 7 times before they actually make the commitment to stay away.
Wow.
That's an
It's
average.
that many times. That's amazing.
And those women who actually leave are in the most danger at the time they're leaving. Of the murders that occur in domestic violence, 75% of those occur while she's leaving or within a month after she's left. So it's a very dangerous time for her. So many times they leave because it's not safe to leave. And only they know that better than we do. You know, we'll help them create a safety plan. If someone is in a violent relationship, if they'll call us, we'll go through the different things that they need to know, and we'll go over a basic safety plan for them. We'll help them think about where they can be and what they need when they leave and those kinds of things. But they know better than we do when it's safe and when it's not safe to leave. But one of the hardest things about our job is to get a call from a victim who says, I'm being battered and I need to leave, but I can't leave right now because he doesn't go to work until Tuesday or Wednesday. And you know that in between, it's a very dangerous time for that victim, because he might realize that she's going to leave, and then it becomes even more dangerous. So one of the hardest parts of our job is to wait and hope.
So there's no going in there?
No.
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 Because in that meantime, they could change their mind.
Right. Right. Or it may not be safe. He may not go to work on Tuesday or Wednesday, you know, and we never call the home. The victim has to call us, because at that point, the batterer may become aware that she's talking to someone about it, and it creates danger for her. And it may create danger for the children, too.
So,
Something I never would have thought of, that you wouldn't try to contact these people.
yeah. So if they
But I
call,
understand it.
if they call and you've made plans, the husband's going to be away on Tuesday,
Right.
they have to get away themselves. There's no going and picking them up.
Well, we have met them. I've met women like part way somewhere. They've had like either a family member or a friend bring them to like maybe a Walmart parking lot or a Casey's, and then we'll transfer that way and then bring them on to shelter.
And we always want to impress upon them to call 911 if they think they're in that much danger. Sometimes victims think that they should call us if they get in danger, you know, immediate danger. And again, another hard part of our job is being on the phone when they've been found out, and or the restraining, if somebody's breaking the restraining order and they're there in the room and they're trying to get to 911. I mean, that's a very difficult time too, to know that they're safe. But I guess what I'm saying is that we want them to call 911 because law enforcement can keep them safe. We really can't keep them safe at that point. They need to be involved with law enforcement, and then law enforcement will ensure they get to us.
So say someone has decided to leave on a Tuesday when the husband is gone, and you've set up a place and you meet and take them. Probably they have left in a hurry, bringing not much of anything.
That's a part of the safety plan. And we talk with victims who call us about the kinds of things that they're going to need. And it's not like loading the van with furniture.
Packing to go on a vacation.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
No.
It's the very important documents and the kinds of things that they're going to need to make a job, or to
Say, I wouldn't have thought of that, documents either. I would have thought toothbrush.
Yeah, that's what was going through my mind.
we can find toothbrushes,
You're right.
but we don't have those
You're
documents.
right.
You know, they're
Social Security cards for the
Right.
children.
Right.
Title to a car if it's in your name. That, you know,
Oh, that's,
medicine for the kids.
that only makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
The very, the other part of that is that leaving the home may be for a short term until there can be a restraining order, and the perpetrator or batterer would have to find other places to go. So we don't know that. We really don't know how it's all going to play out, but we want to make sure they have those important documents that they're going to need for the rest of their lives and the children.
But you're saying that people probably come to your shelter and then go back to the situation, correct? Before they permanently leave?
They don't necessarily make it to the shelter 7 times, but they have called for help typically 7 times before they actually leave, and that usually law enforcement responds 7 times before they actually leave.
So they get to the women's shelter, and I know that there are things, I have friends that collect things on a regular basis for the women's shelter, because you need items.
Yes.
What are some of the items that you need?
Oh,
I'll get my wish list while you're thinking.
These are things that members of our community can donate,
Right.
right.
provide.
We cannot have stuffed toys. That's one
Right.
thing. We had a great teddy bear drive in southeast Iowa, Wayne and Appanoose County. And the teddy bears were donated and actually solicited by some of the high school groups. But those teddy bears were distributed to hospitals and law enforcement centers for children, but they can't actually be in the shelter. So
Okay.
stuffed toys are not.
So I would think things like toothbrushes.
Yeah, those are.
Toothbrushes, personal care items, non-perishable items, when women leave, we like to set them up with like housekeeping, so pots, pans,
Alarm
dishes, clocks is a good one, towels, pillowcases, sheets, bedding. We take like a lot of stuff, but right now we're just not taking clothing. We have a lot of, we just have a lot of clothing.
There are a few items that we will accept in terms of clothing right now, and that's because we really have had an overwhelming response to donations. I mean, it's not because we don't appreciate it. It's just that we have what we need right now, and we need to get that organized at this point, I guess, to some extent. But one of the things that we accept are outfits that they can interview for jobs in, so fairly dressy kinds of things. So everyday casuals we have plenty of, but the very nice interviewing kinds of appropriate dress, we need those. We also still accept a lot of donations of sweatsuits, because sexual assault victims who go to the hospital and they are collecting evidence, so they need to keep the clothes. So we keep a store of a storage of sweatsuits, so that they can leave the hospital in sweatsuits when they.
And how do we get these things to you? Now I remember years ago that I did donate several old suits that I had grown out of, and I took them to, it was one of the pastor's wives here at town, but she's long gone, several years. So is that something that you can do, or there's someone here other
I can do that.
kind of handles that kind of
Is there a
thing?
collection base in Fairfield?
I believe there is. I think it's the United Methodist Church.
Well, see, this is where I had the connection before
Okay.
with the Methodist Church, and it was the pastor's wife at that time. And it was several years ago that she was involved. And I think it was in the paper or something that said she would take.
I believe that's still the pickup point.
Okay.
And I would say, if you're very interested in this, that there's an event coming up called Women for Women, and that is Saturday, May 10th. And we have a poster here on this event. It's going to be at Morning Star Studio. Again, it's Saturday, May 10th at 7 p.m. And I'm sure you can get information and learn more about the program and where to bring things. Of course, they always need money, I'm sure.
Yes, and sometimes that is for areas outside of Ottumwa. For instance, if there is it's kind of a safe night, if they're say in the far reaches of Appalachia County or the far reaches of Jefferson County, and it's in the middle of the night, it's very difficult to try to move everything, and so sometimes we just need money for rooms for overnight, and at that point generally the batterer is in jail and they're safe in that room for overnight until somebody can get them to the shelter, although we will transport in the middle of the night if there's no choice. So we also need a lawnmower, don't we?
Yes, we do.
A lawnmower.
A working
I
lawnmower.
tease Garnetta about that because she's the one that's going to run it.
So you want a riding lawnmower, right?
That'd be nice, but
And we need garden tools, we need paper products, cleaning supplies, bus tokens. We depend on the city transit quite a bit. Phone cards, many times they need to
That's
call.
a great idea.
yeah.
Non-violent, I say that again, non-violent, kids' movies, and educational or craft kinds of activities. We need American and Hispanic movies and craft and educational. We've had a number of families who are Hispanic, and sometimes they're still learning the language, so we need that.
So are you seeing a lot more cases these days? I know times are difficult now,
Yes.
Jobs and things. Holidays, do you see more cases during the holidays?
Normally we do. Normally we see more cases during the holidays. But over our Christmas, New Year's season, nationally, the census was down for shelters. Our calls, number of calls we received were down. And I think you said, what, in the last 8 years?
Yeah, I think that's the lowest it's been in the last 8 years that I had been with shelter.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
That's
it is
good.
good, except we always worry
Yeah.
about those who aren't calling and those who aren't coming, because we know it's out there. Now, that's not true now. I mean, we are having a great deal of business. We're getting a lot of calls, and we have several in the shelter. I think it's an uncertainty of times, economically, to the situation our country's in, and I think around the holidays it was just so uncertain about where things were going and how it was going to be, and I really think that had something to do with it. I think that's what most of the coalitions are speculating, is it had to do with the way the economy was and the way things were going. And sometimes that known problem is better than not knowing. And so I think we...
Now, Jeanne, have you been involved since 1979 with this
well, not
shelter?
directly.
Not directly.
No, although I've worked with the shelter indirectly since that.
So did it start out as kind of a nonprofit group
Yes,
then?
yes.
And it still is a
Yes.
nonprofit group, and so then, of course, there's private donations, which we've talked about.
That's right.
And do you have a grant writer that applies for government grants and gets that kind of thing, or is that come over on your shoulders? Or?
Actually, yes, it is our agency. I mean, we don't have the money to hire a grant writer.
Okay.
So what we apply for, we do ourselves.
Okay.
Cheryl Brown is our director, and Cheryl typically writes most of the grants, assisted by DJ Swope, who is our office manager. So between the two of them, they write grants. Now, since the most recent budget cuts for victims services, which was 13–14%, which is a huge cut into our agencies. We lost 7 shelters this year, statewide, because of those kinds of budget cuts, and many services were limited throughout the state. We had hoped, and we actually went to Des Moines to talk to the legislators and hoped that they would reinstate the $2 million that was cut from our budget, and that didn't happen. They, like last year, counting on the Attorney General's budget for victim compensation, which is a fund that we use also, but it would take probably one serious disaster, terrorist kind of attack to wipe that fund out. So we were hoping that they would reinstate the $2 million, and that didn't happen. We only had one legislator vote to do that.
So was that your whole state budget that was cut? I mean, how did it affect the shelter in Ottumwa over the last couple of years, the budget cuts?
I don't know about a couple of years. I'd say in the last 5 years we went from probably 20 advocates to, what have we got, 6?
That's right, 6 outreach advocates.
You had 20 people doing that before, and now you have 6?
Yes.
So your job is a lot.
Yes.
You have a heavier workload.
All of us do.
And how long have you been involved?
I have been involved this time since October, but I've only been the Jefferson County Advocate since February. But prior to that, I was with the shelter for 8 years and the Wapello County Court Advocate, and then I resigned for 2 years, burnout.
I imagine
And then I came back.
High burnout rate.
Yeah.
I imagine severe burnout when you're involved with some situations that you feel like you just can't
Yeah.
help, and you get so wrapped up in.
Well, they become life and death situations, and it's not like we can make decisions for people. They have to make their own decisions and be committed to that. And it's hard to watch sometimes. But we do have a high burnout rate. We're having lots of turnover since the first of the year, even. So,
What do you need to do to become an advocate? If there's a position open and there's high turnout, what are the qualifications?
well, Was it 20 hours is the first
Yeah,
level
20
one?
hours of level 1 advocate training, which I think we have a training coming up in May.
Okay.
Yes.
And are you looking for advocates?
Yes. Although volunteer advocates are what we're needing at this point.
Right.
We are actually looking for someone to work at the shelter. We have a position open there. And we always like to have resumes and training done so that we can call people. So yes, we would really be interested in anyone that would want to train as an advocate and be available when a job comes up, but certainly as a volunteer. There are many things that volunteers can do, as an advocate too, as long as they are bound by the confidentiality and trained. They can be very helpful to us.
And they would go through the same kind of training then?
Yes.
Then what kinds of things could they do? Some of what you're doing,
I don't know that they would do outreach, but I know that they would be able to work within the shelter and answer like crisis lines.
I see.
Transport women. But if they don't have that training and volunteer, it's just limited to what they can do. I don't know that they could even do like on-site volunteering if they didn't have the advocate training.
Actually, we have, it's fairly limited. Right now, I'm working pretty closely with Cardinal Schools. I do 3 presentations a week. I have been doing that all month at least, and it's the 8th grade, and I did several for the 12th grade health classes. And part of those young people, we have a number of those young people, young women, who are interested in possibly being advocates at some point. So they come to the crisis center and volunteer. And because they haven't had the advocate training, they can't answer the phone. There's a lot of things they can't do because of the confidentiality. But they've been a great help to me in terms of copying materials and those kinds of things that I actually distribute when I do presentations. So
And I'm sure it inspires them for future.
I think they do. I think they get real interested in and we're a good team. I mean, we work together pretty closely. We have a good relationship throughout our office, I think. If we have to, sometimes when we have a high burnout rate, we start doing interventions too, please talk to us, tell us what's going on. So I think we have a good teamwork, and I think they respond to that. I think volunteers feel good about that. So it's
Now, I think the perception is, and I think maybe this is accurate, that grown-ups who are batterers were probably battered when they were children. Is that correct? Is that
I think that's
fair
probably
statement?
a fair statement.
Yes.
Although I would not want to reverse that statement. I would not want to say every child that's being battered is going to be a batterer, because we don't have statistics on that. Not really. We have the statistics of those young people who grew up and became batters. We know that at least over 60 to 70% of those batters say, I was battered as a child. But we don't have statistics on all those people who were battered as a child but aren't battering. We don't have a clue. We don't, how do you track that? So I wouldn't want to set that expectation up for young people either.
And then, as far as drug and alcohol abuse, is that generally part of the picture also?
Yeah.
I would say so.
Yeah, there's a high frequency.
90% of the time?
I wouldn't say that much, but I believe that, again, nationally, they'd say about probably 60 to 70% of the
Okay.
time. Our position with that is that there are lots of other things going on while they're very sober or straight. And so the battering that occurs when they are drinking, it just means that the alcohol allowed them to do something that
Probably intensifies
it
what
intensifies,
already is
yeah.
going on.
We do not accept that as a reason.
Sure.
And the Batters Education Program that is coordinated by the Department of Corrections will not accept that as a reason. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're drunk, sober, or whatever. If you batter someone, then that's criminal. It's a
And
criminal
the
offense.
unemployment rate, I mean, basically, would you say statistically, is that having an impact on, or do we know?
Maybe on the homelessness, but I don't know that anyone has made a prediction that actually causes battering. Battering and sexual assault are really not about unemployment. It's really not about love. It's not about sex. It's all about power and control. So it really doesn't matter if the conditions are the best. If the batterer is into having power and control in a relationship, then the battering's going to happen. It doesn't matter whether they have money, don't have money. It doesn't, you know. So I think that sometimes people believe that battering only occurs in the low economic, socio-economic, you know, all the jargon, but that's not true.
So you're seeing it all across.
You bet.
Doesn't discriminate.
Yeah. I had a question there, but it's
So
floating out there somewhere right now.
Are you following the national Lacey Peterson case? I think people are,
Yes.
Yes.
it's making people really
Sad.
aware,
Very sad.
Amazed.
Yes.
And I haven't
It's-
watched it
it's-
that much, but
It's hard to watch, and it's kind of like I don't like taking work home, and then when you see it, but
Yeah.
right.
but it is very sad.
Have you ever been involved in a situation that didn't turn out for the best? That
I have.
You have?
Not since I've been employed with the shelter, but yes. And I think that's all I can really say about it. It's just very sad. I mean, there's all the grief and the anger and so forth that goes with that, but it's very sad. It's sad for family members. It's sad for the children. I mean, I did a presentation for the counselors in the area, high school counselors in the area, a little over a week ago. And, you know, all the symptomatic behavior of kids who are living in violent homes are the same symptoms that you would see from children who have mental health issues or whose family have alcohol, drug problems or whatever. I mean, you can't, if I said these are the symptomatic behaviors of children who are in violent homes, the counselors are saying, oh, yeah, it sounds like Billy and Joey, you know, and it may not be battering, but you know, I guess the bottom line is that kids are seriously affected, and they're receiving special services because they're affected by the violence in the home.
So there are some counseling that these children can come to
Yes.
to get some help.
Yeah,
When
provide
they're at the
services.
shelter and,
Yes,
and
while we're
ongoing.
in shelter, we have a child advocate, and she usually works with the children.
Okay.
And once they leave the shelter, we will provide services as well.
And does that cost the victim? I mean, does
No.
she have to pay X amount per day that she stays there,
No.
and for ongoing counseling help, that's all a free service to her?
That's wonderful.
So with all your awareness programs, do you think over time in the last 20 years, are we getting better or are we getting worse as a society?
I think we're becoming more aware.
Yes, more aware.
I wouldn't say that, I would say that battering continues to be increasing, and I think that certainly the numbers for the violent deaths, domestic violent deaths are on the increase. Those aren't going down any. But I don't know that we are all aware. I mean, when I talk with young people at the high school age, and we start talking about dating relationships, and they see, like I said, they see jealousy as love. They don't understand the power and control that goes with that. Or, as I said, the batterer many times is very, very charming, and so they're saying things like, I just want to spend all my time with you. Well, that includes time that she might want to have with family or other friends or other activities. So, you know, sometimes they just don't recognize it, and batterers are in control. You know, seldom do you see a batter their victim in front of family that is, like her parents, or in the middle of a grocery store. I mean, those times are very planned, and they're very controlled. Yeah, very private. So it's the same way with dating violence kinds of things. I mean, those aren't battering in the group of friends. So it's hard to know what kind of headway we're making, because I still feel when I do those presentations that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about a healthy and unhealthy relationship. It wouldn't be uncommon for young people to think that because they were drinking, they were sexually assaulted, and so they assume the blame for that. You know, the victim feels like they're to blame, and so they don't report. We have a lot. All the statistics that I read and I give to you are reported. Those are all reported. Then we know that there are many that go unreported.
Since it is such a secretive, private thing.
Right. It's very compromising, you know, self-compromising.
So if there were one or two things that could really help you out, or help the shelter out, or the agency, obviously more money always helps. But beyond that, I mean, is that the biggest factor that you think is hindering making it better? You know, I get frustrated when, you know, as we get more aware, it seems like there would be less statistics, and that people would become more educated, and men would know, oh yes, this is wrong behavior. And yet, is it because we have more population and so there's more problems, you know? I mean...
Well, you want to go first?
No, you go.
I mean, that's kind of you know, the $1,000,000 question that we'd all love to have the answer to. But
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
But I think I have some personal beliefs about that's based on lots of experience of working with violence, violence against children, and violence against in domestic violence and sexual assault. And my position about that is that we spend, and you know, I don't want to put it back on the the educators, because it's not fair to expect them to raise our kids. But I do believe that it starts at home, you know, teaching and showing examples of good, healthy relationships. Unfortunately, many times they see very unhealthy relationships, and that's what they model, because that's what they know. Our schools do a great job of teaching. I mean, I think even though Mr. Stillwell may be concerned about some of the criteria coming down from the federal government at this point about not leaving children behind, we do a good job in Iowa, I think better than many states. But always I get concerned about our not teaching kids about healthy and unhealthy relationships, red flags, how to do conflict resolution. And there are some schools that are way ahead of us than other schools, you know, I mean, but resolving conflicts in a healthy manner instead of having to fight your way out of that, or fair fighting.
And a lot of that is basic communication skills,
right,
how to
right.
communicate with someone.
Right.
And for that person to learn to be able to express. You know, we've certainly got the passive-aggressive language down. I mean, most people understand that, but then how to live that and live it healthily and be assertive and all those kinds of things.
And we have to be assertive about the about the old belief systems. You know, I think one of the it always comes up even when I'm dealing with young people, and it is that male privilege kind of thing. That, I mean, I'll ask the classroom, and this gets interesting. It also depends on the school you ask the question to, or even the age group. But when did women get the right to vote? And they're scratching their head, you know. And finally, it might come up. Someone might say 1920, and I may have to tell them when women got the right to vote. Okay. Then I asked them, well, when was the country? You know, when did it become a nation? there's sometimes several guesses about that, by the way, but they usually come up with 1776. And I said, well, so who was voting from 1776 to 1920? I mean, who was making the rules? And this is an old belief system that women really were property, and they weren't very bright, you know, and they couldn't do this and they couldn't do that, and their job was to be in the home. And frankly, after World War II, it was very clear that women needed to be out there working, because the men were away. They were at World War II, you know. Women had to do those things. They even played softball, for heaven's sakes, or baseball. You know, they had to do those things, but there's still a lot of that old belief system that women have a place, and they're supposed to be in that place, and if they're not, then something's wrong, you know. And we've got to change that. We've got to make it better.
Well, I
At
do
least
happen to know that by way of the grapevine, I found out there was somebody in this district, an older gentleman, that would not vote for me because I was a woman. And he said he would never vote for a woman because they're not smart enough.
Well, besides, your place is probably in the home. You know.
That's scary.
Yeah.
So it is still out there. I
That's
think
amazing.
it's probably, particularly, and I'm sure this was an older gentleman, and you know,
I know.
thought it in some ways was humorous, and I hope that there were not very many people out there thinking like that.
Well, you know, and I think that there are. That's what's worrisome. There really are people out there that are still thinking like that. Maybe not as blatantly.
Yeah.
Sometimes they hide it, but deep inside they
Yeah.
feel like that.
And sometimes it comes up. It's like, for instance, if in many relationships, if she wants to buy a car, he has to help her. And many times he has to help her just because the salesman thinks that a woman really doesn't know what she's going to buy anyway and how much it should cost. You know, I mean.
Or
Okay,
working with contractors.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, good example.
Yes.
And and then, but what happens when he wants to go buy his pickup? You have to go with him? No. Do you want to pick out the pickup? No. You know, there's this double standard that still goes on, and it's not something that should be an issue necessarily about what kind of car or what kind of pickup. The issue is, how do you communicate and how do you make decisions in this relationship that everybody's comfortable with, without feeling like they're being forced to buy a car that they don't want. I mean, when you think about, when you pick, and that's another thing I talk with kids about, is let's think about picking a vehicle out. What do you look for in a vehicle? You look for dependability, trustworthiness, track record. Has it run fairly well? Does that mean, and does it have good history in terms of the make? And, you know, well, when we're choosing mates, why wouldn't we be looking for those same things? That it's trustworthy, dependable, you know, has a good track record. You know, why wouldn't we be looking at that when we're shopping? So, I guess I don't know. There's a lot of things we still need to do for awareness. There's a lot of things we still need to do to help kids learn how to develop healthy relationships and really reject the unhealthy pieces, because those are the ones that get us into problems later.
We certainly want to stop those behaviors before
Yes.
they're years into it, and it's much more difficult to get out of those situations
So
after it's become a habit of living that way.
Right.
when you give programs, you don't get into areas of detecting a batterer in the making. I mean, is there a bully in the school that
Yeah, I
are
do.
they
Yeah.
directed to get help?
Yeah. First of all, I do warning signs, red flags we call them.
Okay.
And those red flags are that jealous obsessiveness, someone that's very explosive, someone that's on an emotional roller coaster, someone that tries to isolate you, someone that wants to make decisions for you or tell you what you think and how you feel. You know, those are the kinds of things that
So
you need to
not
be concerned
only
about.
the educator that's hearing this or the students are identifying with being victimized by that person, but also identifying someone that might be like that
Right.
and directing them towards help.
Right.
Because that's an important part too.
I think it is, but of course, our position is to make sure people are safe.
Right.
And so we would probably advocate for the victim in that.
Right.
And if we were, if we had any ability to have any input, then certainly we would want to direct that person, but our position would be to try to create safety for the victim.
But I can spot little boys or even little girls that are in the shelter that are going to grow up and be batterers. I mean, by the way that they speak to their mother. I mean, and you know that's directly from the father. And so I kind of talk to the mother and suggest to her she needs to get him some type of counseling or he's going to grow up with an anger management problem.
Well, and sometimes children who witness violence, even though the father, in 90% of the cases, is the batterer, they may blame the mother, because that cycle of violence I talked about, you know, there's the tension building, and then the battering, and then what comes next is the honeymoon, where there's apologies, and let's go to the movie, let's go out to dinner. Well, the kids may be hearing all this crying and all the commotions going on during the battering, but in the morning, Dad's being such a really nice guy, and all Mom has to do is be nice now, and it won't happen again. Well, Mom's probably not being real nice because she's upset and worried and afraid. So what the child sees is that Mom is not being very cooperative here, and she's not being very nice, and Dad's trying to be nice. So sometimes,
it's very confusing.
yeah,
to that.
it would be very confusing.
And most of the people in your position, the advocates, are they female or male, or is there a
Female. We had one male. In all the years I'd been there, we had one male advocate.
A majority.
And is it better to have females, because when females come to the shelter, they can bond a little easier than a male? They don't want to be around a man?
For the one male advocate that we had, he was the most asked for advocate. He really was. But he's probably one in a million men that could do this type of work. I mean, he would never stand above the woman. If he were to speak to her, he'd either squat down or sit on the floor. It was just unbelievable. And I would have women call that would want him.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, are there other areas that we haven't covered that you want to get covered today when this airs?
Well, I think one of the things I would like to just kind of bring up is that we also work closely with sexual assault victims, and we are seeing a number of those incidents, and recently it's becoming almost commonplace in sexual assault of teenagers and young people. College people are the date rape drugs. I am not an expert on date rape drugs. I do know that there are about 3 of them are being used out there and have been for the past almost 3 years. And many times, at least one of those drugs, as I understand it, is to induce a coma. So you can imagine what that means in terms of the consciousness, and they're all a tranquilizer. One of them is a veterinarian tranquilizer, and so what happens is that they're put in the drinks, and I don't care if young people are drinking water, you know. They always have to watch their drink. They don't drink out of punch bowls at parties, and they always keep their drink in their hand, even going to the bathroom. I mean, there's rules of that because we've had more and more young people who have been sexually assaulted as a result of date rape drugs.
That's so hard to imagine that that's going on in our community. But you've had calls,
yes.
and it is.
Yes, it's going on. And many times it's not reported because of the shame. And it's like, I shouldn't have been at the party, I shouldn't have been drinking.
Right.
There's a couple of things that I always advise young men. Number one, that sexual assault by law can occur if she's drinking and cannot give consent. By law, it's called rape. There's a continuum of sexual activity, and the consensual activity is when 2 people agree on what's going to happen and agree that that's okay. Any coercion beyond that, you know, gets you into problems. And giving someone alcohol to negotiate past the no, that's called rape in Iowa. And some people will say, well, how can they prove it? Well, maybe they can't prove it, but they can make somebody's life pretty miserable and cause some serious damage during that time. The other thing I tell them is that date rape drugs are now a felony. So anyone using those drugs, we advise victims of rape to not shower or take a bath, go immediately to the hospital. We recommend that they do a sexual assault kit so there's a collection of evidence, although we don't force anyone to do anything they're not comfortable with. We recommend that they talk to the law enforcement officer so that the evidence can be collected and preserved. And we also recommend that if they have any reason to believe, or they don't have a memory of a lot of it, of time in what happened, that they do a drug screening. So we're becoming more attentive to it and hoping that. And by the way, all of that examination is funded by the Victims' Compensation Fund out of the Attorney General's office. So it's no cost to the victim to go to the hospital. And they should. There could be injuries they aren't aware of.
Yeah. Now, you did touch on something, and that was the homeless.
Yes.
And you don't, call me ignorant, but I don't think of people being homeless in Fairfield, Iowa. And that's probably an ignorant notion.
By
you know.
definition, maybe. Is
But do you see a lot of homeless women there? I mean, what is our situation here in Southeast Iowa regarding that particular issue?
We see quite a few homeless women. I mean, I don't know the statistics on that, but I know we have gotten our share of homeless women.
And they're only allowed to stay, you said, 15 days.
Once in an unusual while, there'll be kind of an extension, but we try to find other plans for them. I think the issue with the homelessness right now is, as I said, somewhat by definition, more families are doubling up. And then by nature, I think sometimes they just aren't able to live together, so they separate, and then you have someone kind of needing a place to live. But also, the new welfare laws have created some homelessness. If you have a woman who has received benefits for 5 years for her 5 children, then she has nowhere to go if she has no income by that time for whatever reason. And regardless of whether you agree with people being on welfare or not isn't the issue. The issue is we still have 5 children that are on the streets. So I think that somehow we have to think about that and how we can address that better so that those children aren't homeless because of some criteria that she has met on the welfare system or by government standard. Because we did see a family recently that had nowhere to go, regardless of what opportunities had been offered or whatever. I mean, that's really not the issue. The issue is we were still with a fairly large family at the shelter because the benefits were depleted, the benefit period. And that includes for the children, as I understand it. I believe that their 5 years is up, so they may never be eligible in a lifetime.
It must be also very rewarding to know when you are able to help people in situations like this.
Yeah, most of the time it is.
It is.
Yeah, say that.
When you can make a difference, such
Really?
a difference
Yeah.
in someone's life and maybe get them on the right track and, you know.
You know, Susan, I've had people literally call me and start telling me about being sexually assaulted when all I recommend that people say is, I'm sorry that's happened to you, I'm so glad you're alive, But the other thing I do is say, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You have to believe it's not your fault. And I'll just go over and over and over with that, listening, but at the same time continuing to reinforce to them it's not their fault. And I have people hanging up and thanking me for telling them that it's not their fault. I mean, and that's so little to do, but it feels good to know that you've given somebody some relief, or a parent of a child that has been sexually assaulted. There's so much guilt that goes with that, as any, quote, normal parent would do. They blame themselves and they want things to be better and they wish they'd known, all of those kinds of things. And when you let them know it's not your fault, it's not your daughter or your son's fault, it's not your fault, it's the perpetrator's fault. They and that feels good to know that you've given them some relief, just even that amount.
So are you going to be doing any training in Jefferson County for any groups or schools or anything open to the public that people
The
could come to?
sisterhood, but that wouldn't be like public. That would be girls 13 to 19. The advocate training, I believe, is only going to be in Ottumwa at Indian Hills. But if there was anybody that wanted to take the advocate training, they could contact me at the Department of Corrections, and then I could give them the days and the time that it would be.
Okay, great.
And so
Great.
that would be here in Fairfield they would
Yes.
call?
Yes.
And do you know that number?
No, I don't.
No, so call the Department of Corrections here in
I
Fairfield.
do know it's
the law center,
yes.
I assume.
No, Department of Corrections is over on Jefferson Avenue.
Okay. So it's a separate entity.
Yes.
Okay. And
Well, we can probably find that number too, or maybe have it here at the studio or something.
I have
Someone would
cards of
happen
the
to
number.
call.
I just don't know it.
Yes.
I just have not memorized my own number.
Well, you're not
well,
used
you
to
haven't
calling
been
it.
here
That's
that
exactly
long
right.
either.
Yes.
And they can also call the 800 number.
Yes.
Yes.
Find
And
it.
that is in the phone book because that's how I got a hold
Yes.
of you.
Okay.
So,
Let's talk a little bit again about this event that
Yeah.
will benefit.
yeah, and I wanted to say, yeah, because I have some little more information here. Again, this is the Women for Women, an evening of entertainment performed by women for an audience of women. It costs $16 in advance to go, $20 at the door. May 10th, 7 p.m. at Morning Star Studio. That's on the east side of the Fairfield Square. Tickets are available at the At Home Store, Democratic Design, Entree Cafe, Home at Last, Revelations, Timely Solutions, Party Goods, and more, and through the Ottumwa Crisis Center in Ottumwa. And I do know that they are collecting artwork. There's Debbie Pogel, who's collecting artwork, and I think they're going to be having some silent auction
I believe so.
type
Right.
silent auction. Her number is 472-2472, and Deborah Roberts is collecting mint condition. I do stress they are looking for very nice, like new items such as books, any kinds of gifts, recorded media, CDs, those kinds of things. She can be reached at 472-2301, and I guess they will be selling those items. So this is a fundraiser for the women's shelter. I think also to an awareness kind of program for Fairfield, for Jefferson County, to let people know that we do have people using the shelter in Ottumwa. It is very much needed, and certainly because of the budget cuts in the last few years, we need extra private help because we're not getting it from the state budget.
This is an important issue, and even though the 16 or 20 at the door might seem like a lot, it's a donation, and it should be a fun event. There will be items to leave bids on, art items, and I think there's probably entertainment
Yes.
and some educational things going on. I don't know if there's anything else you can add to the event that you know about.
Just that we really appreciate the Fairfield community for doing this. Margaret Mead said once that never doubt that a small group of committed and concerned citizens could change the world. And indeed, it's the only thing it ever has. And I kind of use that a lot because we count on the small communities. And even though Fairfield's not as small as some of the communities we work with and who contribute to our agency, but we do appreciate all that the Fairfield community does. Jefferson County has been good to us, and we appreciate that.
Very.
And I think that's a good way to close, is with that thought that you can make a difference. You can make a difference. Thank you for being here today and sharing with us about the Crisis Center and Women's Shelter, and we invite you to attend the event on May 10th.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.